a couple of weeks ago. There we go. So we're getting back into the hang of doing things kind of the normal way for our lunch bunches. So the lunch bunches are just topics on a given, just the conversations on a given topic. And Bello has been generous enough to join us. Maybe we'll give everybody an opportunity just to say hello, and then I'll do a little bit more of an introduction. But Bello, I'll just briefly say one of the things that I think is so impressive is you were 2015 Best Disability Advocate, according to San Francisco. I'm just going to say San Francisco, everybody. So you're coming at us with that expertise. I'm Ann Tracy, and one of the hosts of the lunch bunches that we have 2 of these a month, and one is dedicated kind of to use and digital equity, and that's the kind of the session that we're in right now. So yeah, the other folks in the room kind of know me. I write the Blanded on Broadband blog. I was a reference librarian. I have a degree in library and information science, and I always have a great interest. I also do a lot of web development, so I have some interest in some of the ADA stuff. And for my angle, it's kind of the independence of the ADA web stuff with search engine optimization. I may be the only one in the room who would geek out on that one, but now. So we'll just have the others introduce themselves so that you have an idea, Bello, of who's here, and then we'll kind of get in. So I don't know, Mary, if you want to.
Sure. My name is Mary Magnuson, and I work at Blandon Foundation up here in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. And my role here is mostly just to be the Zoom host.
Doing so much more.
Yeah, usually I'm kind of a little frazzled today by all that much more, so I'm just kind of not entirely on my game.
No one is.
As far as talking to other people, so. Barbara, do you want to go next?
Barbara Jeter Klein, Leesburg County. It's a good day here. All of the corn is gone, so the dogs aren't running back and forth like mad dogs because there's tractors and combines going by every 5 minutes. So it's quiet here. And I've been doing consulting, broadband planning with Leesburg County for the past 4 years.
Nice.
I'm David Farmer. I am a senior network engineer at the University of Minnesota. To put it more colloquially, I'm an internet plumber.
Yeah, you are a kind of a high up plumber. You take care of a lot of pipes.
I would echo that. Do you want to be called as Mr. Farmer, or I didn't get your first name?
David is fine.
David,
Farmer,
okay, great. Well, David, I used to be.
Hey, big guy, any of those will work.
Sure, David. Well, I used to be a Unix systems administrator, and so I know firsthand how important network people are. So, sounds like you have your hands busy there.
Yep.
I didn't realize, Bella, that you had been a Unix administrator. That's fascinating. This kind of leads us to you, Bella, and I'm just going to let you talk about yourself, if that's okay. As I said, I was so impressed, and you come to us from our friends at Kairos Alive, and folks may remember they do a lot of the movement during Zoom calls. So, and Bella comes as an expertise and a disability advocate, and apparently a Unix administrator. So with that, Bella, if I can just have you introduce yourself a little bit more, that'd be great.
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you all for making time and for the invitation. I'm always excited to talk about digital inclusion and equity. And I'll just start off with just some context and a little background. And so back in 2007, I was working for Sequoia Partners, which is a VC firm, and I was managing a lot of their startups. You know, my job was really to build the startups, build the team, and test the product. And so it was a big job. I was in my 20s, and I thought that the world was my oyster, like most people in their 20s do. And then I came across this a group of men, And these guys were people who I used to be friends with in high school, and they assaulted me, and I received so many blows to the head that I became blind. And so here I was in Silicon Valley, now disabled, working with some of the best technologists, and with surgeries and rehabilitation, they weren't able to get me my vision back. But I was hopeful that being in this place with technology would get me some tools. And, this started this long journey of me, going back to work and being moved around. And so, like I said, I was a, Unix systems administrator. That's how I started my career right out of college, moved into, professional services, IT, and then moved into this job with in operations with tech startups. And it was so bizarre to me that here was with some of the most brilliant people, and I couldn't get them for them to alter, their website or to make changes to the apps or tools we were using so I could use them with my screen reader technology. And I eventually got pushed around from operations to, then they say, well, you can't, you can't do that, we can't change, modify the tools, but maybe you could be a tech writer. And the tech writing software they were using, even something like Jira back in those days, was not accessible. And so left tech writing, said, hey, I'm leaving high tech, I'm going to go into journalism. And then secured a job as a columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle. Did that for a while, but as my journalism career moved, I was then being pushed again by digital inaccessibility, where they were using tools that I couldn't use. Journalists were now required to do video captioning or do photo editing and video editing, and I couldn't do that, and I got pushed out of journalism for that reason. And so I said, okay, those who can do teach. And then because of the success of my writing and my books, I was able to secure teaching appointments. I was at Yale. I was at Stanford. I still teach part-time writing. I have an appointment at Metro State here locally, and I was at the U before that. But with education, I mean, I kept running against, digital inaccessibility. I couldn't teach certain courses because the books were inaccessible. Canvas was not accessible in those days when I started teaching, and it really pushed me to figure out a solution. How can I help people or teach people about accessibility? Went back to grad school and got my doctorate in education technology, and this is what I do now. I have my consulting company. I have my own methodology, which is the digital inclusion sphere, and I'm gonna be relaunching my certificate, which is the digital inclusion practitioner certificate. We were using a learning management system, which was acquired by a bigger company who just didn't want to follow up with the accessibility protocols, and so the platform became inaccessible. So now
Jeez.
I've created my own platform from scratch, and it's 100% accessible. And I'm just excited about that. I'll be relaunching next spring. And so my experience with accessibility is from not just someone who's a practitioner and a technologist, but from someone who's been constantly affected by not being able to access information.
Can I ask more about the digital inclusion certificate, and what does that include? Is that very technology focused, or does that have an advocacy component to it as well?
So how for those of you who are not familiar with digital accessibility, it's a relatively new field of study. Even when I was applying for my PhD programs, many schools said we couldn't accept you because we don't have anyone in our faculty who could mentor you. And so ended up, building this team of scholars across the world, and mostly in Europe, because Europe is about maybe 5 years ahead of us when it comes to digital accessibility. And so something that I recognize is that, the accessibility baselines and guidelines came out in 2008, and today here in Minnesota, our state government practice is to follow standards from 2008. The web has changed so much since 2008, yet this is the what's being, practiced here. And so my goal with one of the reasons I frame my training and my counseling and my consulting around digital inclusion is because my content is really targeted at content creators, not technologists. There's a lot of classes for, engineers, designers, they could go somewhere else. But for somebody who is using, who's a, small business, small pop and shop, a blogger, a stay-at-home parent, doing a small business, they don't have the time or probably the desire to go take programming classes. So my approach is understanding how to select tools, because when we look out there and, and how to purchase your tools, there are choices that are better than others when it comes to accessibility, how to, process accommodation requests if you get them. And so to better answer your questions, digital inclusion is two components for me, is getting understanding the tools and how to optimize the tools for accessibility. So whether it's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, most people don't realize that those could be made accessible. You just have to turn on the tools and then learn how to use them. And so really, opening people's perspective to maximizing the tools that they already have to accessibility, and also understanding, ableism, and understanding, digital accommodations.
I'm writing one of the things that occurs to me as we talk to a lot of folks who are, and a lot of what we do is promote broadband and broadband use in rural areas. And one of the reasons that people like to do that, blend with the community leaders, is often people who are trying to recruit people to their area. So I can remember a few years ago, the truth of the matter is the websites were not appealing to anyone. They were, you look at a city website and it was either they focused all on the local meetings, or they just weren't attractive. And I think that there's been an effort more to take a look, especially I think in the last couple of years when people have been more, well, really during the pandemic, as people have been thinking about moving to different areas. But how can we be mindful of trying to reach out to people with disabilities in these websites and in this communication, when we're trying to get people to move to these rural communities, or even to get them involved in some of these broadband committees?
I think that getting people involved with the broadband communities, that's something that I wasn't familiar with. When you say broadband communities, can you explain what they are, how they function? Because I'm not familiar myself.
A little bit looking at Barbara, because she knows from the inside what this is like. She is one of the community leaders, but and I don't want to put you on the spot at all, Barbara, but you have done a lot of work to get people in your community to get better broadband, right? Set you up that way.
Well, yes, and what we've done because of COVID is to meet virtually. So we've been meeting virtually and have rarely met, if at all. But what I'm thinking, so what the broadband community is people talking about these issues and moving ahead on getting fiber built out. But the next phase of that is this digital equity thing. And one of the things that I thought of as you talked, Bello, is, oh, and I've talked to a friend this morning who's going to Guatemala. I just looked you up and saw you were born there. So with some of the federal dollars that we're getting in Lee Center, which is a small town, they're creating a clubhouse, which is a place where people with disabilities can gather. We're hoping to make a coffee shop out of it. And I'm thinking, boy, what a Wi-Fi hub too. What a place where people could come together and learn about digital stuff as well. We just need to kind of build that into everything, because when COVID came through, it just exacerbated the issues of not being inclusive enough and digital issues. And there's just so much more we can do. So a lot of towns are doing these clubhouse kind of things, which would be a great way to build into the people with disabilities and support them. But that's really people with mental health issues. People with other issues are, there's not that kind of a hub either. So it's it's challenging, but what a great challenge to look at.
Absolutely. Something that I learned in my many of my years of just being an artist and and being a writer is that I feel that, if there's you know, I look at problems as opportunities, and yeah, no, what an opportunity to make an impact. Um, so something that I just want to preface is that, my digital inclusion model, it consists of three parts, which is testing, which you always test to make sure that things are what they say they are. You'll be surprised how many companies, tools have these amazing, beautiful inclusion statements and say they're ADA compliant, and they're not. It's
Mm,
actually just marketing jargon. So the
mm,
first piece is testing, to no matter what digital property you're designing, is testing. The second part is connectivity. And I really take into, I when I developed this model, I really took in a lot from the digital divide and the fact that, at least in the United States, um, a lot of people are living in rural areas and can't access the web. And
yeah.
so that's where that piece means. And specifically connectivity, there's specific ways to design your website, to design your content. So if someone
Yeah.
has a bad connection, or it doesn't, or it's intermittent, they could still access the content. And there's specific steps to take, like how to make your content accessible, maybe through a downloadable PDF, or
Mm,
there's an offline version for some apps. And so then the third piece is really training people on how to maintain the tools and maintain the content. Because one of the biggest misconceptions there is that, okay, we made an accessibility audit, they're accessible, this is it. And people don't realize that, technology, it's organic, it's ever changing. I mean, we all have those updates that just kind of throw our phones and computers for a loop. And sometimes you could spend a year making something accessible, and a simple update from a vendor could render it completely, inaccessible to an entire community. And so I'm glad that you guys are, organizing and building community around the awareness of broadband, because I think it's super important. And that's how I differentiate myself from, there's plenty of other organizations who say we practice digital accessibility that just focused on, making sure that people follow, ADA, versus for me, is, ADA is important, but there's this big connectivity piece that's still problematic. I mean, the rural communities are, ridiculously underserved, not just, in Minnesota, but in most of this country.
Well, and it seems like it would be nice to hear from people in the center, in LeSueur County, people from the community who have disabilities too, and just how to get them to the table. It's great to hear from you, Bello, but it's nice, people want to know about what their neighbors are doing, especially when you're going to try to campaign to get funding from the city council or the county commission or something like that.
mhm.
No, definitely. I think that whenever you're trying to, when it comes to engagement and the disability community, um, one of the biggest mistakes I see repeated over and over with organizations is that they create one solution, and they don't take into account that the disability community is in um it's there's a wide range of ability and conditions to
Mhm.
take into mind. So for example, if just creating one survey would not be enough, you need to have, at least 2 or 3 options so you could capture the most people possible. And so we've had, at least with some of my clients, we've had success where we partner them with, like, to collect information. Many people with disabilities, especially in rural areas, have problems with transportation.
Yeah.
And so how do we make sure that their voices are heard from home or from somewhere else? And so we have the option of, with some of our clients, where they create apps that people could, download and then upload their content to. We have the barcodes that we send out to people to their homes, and that they could scan or have someone else scan for them, and different ways to engage. I think that whenever engaging any community that's robust, like, the LGBT or the disability community, you can't just have one approach.
Yeah.
You have to have multiple approaches to capture as many people as possible. And even then, recognizing that there's still going to be, people who can't, partake.
Yeah. I think one of the challenges is, and let me also share, Bella, that I'm a social worker and a disabilities advocate too. And I ran the disability programs in Hennepin County for 8 years. So I see disabilities as you're segmented by your disability, and almost everybody has more than one disability. One of the things I like to say is people with developmental disabilities, they can have mental health issues too. Who doesn't? But that's one of the boxes are by advocacy too. So you see people advocating for mental health issues, advocating for Down syndrome, advocating for this, advocating for that. And so when you look at a cohesive community, it's not there. And that would be so cool to come to somehow, because disability is very, very diverse, very, very diverse. And hard to figure out how to network there. Maybe we need to have a fair, disability fair. Any disability come and share what's up. We have a bunch of booths there like we do for other things.
Well, that would be one approach, right? So my question would be, okay, how can people partake in the fair virtually, right?
Exactly. You have to do both ways now. Exactly.
Yeah.
And even if it wasn't virtual, you'd have to have transportation, but transportation is almost easier than doing a joint virtual versus, yeah.
And not to let people off the hook, but we're still figuring out virtual and hybrid for the able world.
Yes.
Let alone the disabled world.
Yes.
Even for the able world, it ain't easy. And like I said, I'm not trying to let people off the hook, but we also have to be, we also have to consider that, it's hard, and even harder for the disabled.
I have found great success, with campaigns of many different types. And, so like I said, the third part to my model, which is training, is, what step one is, how to manage the digital accommodations. And so I break up the learners into 3 different categories. They're novices, specialized users, and then power users. And so understanding your community demographics, where they fall into those brackets, and there's more, those brackets are even further broken down, that would help you really prepare. And so the cool thing about those brackets is that, again, digital inclusion is not just about disability, it's about everyone.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
so those brackets could be used for somebody who doesn't identify as disabled. For me personally, in my research and my practice, I feel that, the 2 communities outside people with disabilities who benefit from digital inclusion are English learners. So an example is, English learners, when they look at closed captions, they see the word, right? And then they're able to look it up.
Yeah.
And so in my research, videos with captioning have improved comprehension for English learners by 77%.
Wow, that's very cool.
And this is a population that I sample of 800 people across the country. So, my model is evidence-based, based on research. And so, for example, we take this approach, a novice user is somebody who, for whatever reason, doesn't have any official training on any software, accessible software or device. They just don't, whether they don't have the money in their county to find it, or maybe they're, for whatever, they just don't. And that's where the ableism part comes, where it's, and I have a lot of social workers, and advocates who say, well, why don't they? And I was like, well, you just take people for what they are that day. You're not here to solve their problems, you're just here to help them, right? So just keep in mind, an novice user, for whatever reason, you don't need to know what the reason is. You don't need to ask them questions. You just know that if someone's a novice user, you may have to loan them a device and give them training on it. Or you may have to partner them with somebody who could train them or help them execute a task. Yeah. Then moving to the bucket of specialized users, these individuals are probably the largest population within the disability community and the population at large, where they're specialized users, they know 2 to 3 pieces of software really well. But once they step outside those 2 or 3 pieces of software, they get lost. They are outside the comfort, right? And so one approach that I have to helping people in that space is, okay, what apps are they or pieces of technology are they very familiar with? And let's buy a tool or select or create training that's similar to it, whether it's the user experience or the map or something in that matter. Then we have the power users, and this is the smallest group in our population. These are, probably someone like, David here, who's a power user who understands technology in and out, but, he's not in the ability to always help others, yet they're still part of the community. And how do we engage them in this process, right? Also power users, you have to be able to identify them, because if you have too many power users in a study or sample group, they might tilt your product to a different way. And I point to, Google and Apple, where, they have accessibility features to their products, but all of their disabled, team members are all power users with PhDs from Harvard, MIT, and that doesn't represent most people, right? So just be aware of who your power users are, how many you have, how can you engage them, because most of them want to be of service, but how do you not overwhelm them? And how do you make sure that they're not, you don't have too many and are then creating a training or a product or service that novice and specialized users are going to find tough to use. So that's just sort of my synopsis on managing digital accommodations with my model. And again, it's a model that's, evidence-based on research and users. And it's just one way that I found, success in, addressing accommodations for people with disabilities.
I feel like we've opened up a crack in a huge door that we need to really put some time into thinking about how to move this ahead differently.
Well, and I think about how these accommodations, to how there is that interdependence, and the example I always think of back in the day is, when they started putting ramps on the sidewalks, was about the same time I started using a stroller.
Mm-hmm.
It was great. It
Yeah.
made sense. It made sense for bikes, for strollers, for anybody, with a cane or a wheelchair or anything else. And then I take a look, especially in rural areas, but absolutely not exclusively, there's an aging population.
Yep.
The small print gets smaller to me every day. So I think a lot of these are coming up with, people are moving, people who were specialized users at one time are now retired and their abilities are different. How can we help with some of that too, to reach out with the digital inclusion aspect of it.
And something that I want to point out is that, which in each bracket, there's a level 1, 2, and 3, and someone who's a specialized user level 3, after a while, they start dropping. And so they could go back to being level 1, which means is they know how to use old pieces of software, not what's current.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so the thing is that once you're able to build these systems, you could say, hey, you recognize them and you know how to help them, because I think that's the biggest frustration. At least I could speak for myself as someone with a disability. I ask for accommodations, and then there's this like what I call forced intimacy, where there's questionnaires were like, how did you become disabled? Like, why is that relevant? I just need, and I still see, even in Hennepin County, Carver County forms and places. Well, how did you lose your disability? What's your diagnosis?
Oh yeah.
Sign from a doctor. Like, I just need a Braille card.
Yeah.
Why do you need my life story?
Yeah.
And so again, it goes back to, if you're able to recognize the accommodation you need for someone, then it's better. So I'll walk you guys through an example where, ADA, it says that, PDFs need to, PDFs is what you need on your website. However, in order to utilize the PDF with assistive software, you need to be a specialized user 2 or higher. And so even though the law is PDF and, companies are sticking to their guns. Oh, I'm just putting PDFs because that's what the law says. In reality, people should be offering PDFs and rich text files so they could send it to people who are novices or who are specialized users of one. And so again, it's all about like, having, an ability to serve as many people as possible. So with my clients, I say, you got to have if you're going to have an application, it needs to be in PDF because that's the law, but the law is not, helping, 2/3 of the population. And so offer it in a Microsoft Word document for people who have, words, specialized users ones, but do the RTF for people who are novices. So no matter what device they're using, it's going to work the same.
On the more focused on the broadband side of things, we've talked about access to broadband, but I've just been thinking about how that ties into the disabled community, and there's rural access to broadband, but then there's also access to broadband from an affordability perspective. And I would think that there would be a lot of alignment on the affordability side with the disabled because they're more likely to be low income as well, since
Absolutely.
they have so many other problems to conquer, even just for employment.
Yep.
Absolutely. And, that's for me, with back to that connectivity part of my model is where I'm not just talking about design and options, but also recognizing that, sometimes people are borrowing someone else's connection, the cost value of having web, sometimes people lose, and so one approach that I had is like, you have to be able to create, a way for people to access your content offline. And then what would that look like and how would that be managed? I teach at Metro State, and we have students that are up in Bemidji, other parts of of the state, and they can't access our D2L, and at that in that I'm happy that I'm training this, and I was able to then create the classes with in a way where I could send them and email it to them, and understanding that that's the best they could do. But having that open-mindedness is different. So I've been working with institutions who say, oh, we can absolutely not email any form. And when I say, why not? Well, that's just not how we do things. And they really don't have an answer, right? So again, it goes back to having those 2 to 3 different ways for someone to access a service or a product.
That reminds me, I had to fax something to someone recently, and at that fax,
Yeah. I still have to fax from time to time. It's really challenging.
It's very challenging. I concur. I agree.
Well, and in the medical world, fax is still the gold standard for
Right.
so many things, which is just so backwards.
But here's something to consider, like, and I hope I don't sound like a salesman just pitching my ideas, but this is, where I work from all day long. So this is my wheelhouse. And so, this goes back to, procurement, being trained in procurement and understanding, for instance, I just had a client who says, well, I don't know what to do about this fax because my insurance company, that's the only way they work. And I was able to find another insurance company who, had an accessibility statement, who did PDFs, Word documents. And I said, you know what, just don't give them your money. And, they had a contract, they had to wait 6 months, but once that was up, they went to a new vendor who met all their needs, right? And so one of the reasons why these companies are getting away with what they're doing is because even if we're unhappy, we're still giving them our money.
Yeah. And that's where I think it would be nice there'd be an opportunity for some rural communities to really make an effort to reach out to people with disabilities, understanding that means a lot of different things. No, but you could,
Yeah.
Something that I want to do is, so, now that I have, I'm not tied to an existing learning management system, but it's my own little place that I created from scratch. I have more ability in lowering my cost, and something that I would like to do is really partner with an organization that could help me, promote the lower cost, or the scholarships and stuff to the right people, and so, for instance, like, I don't want to go on Twitter and say, hey, I have a scholarship, and have all these people who don't really need it get it, right?
right.
And so that's something that I'm very conscious of. I learned from my mistake. I did that in the past. I'm like, oh great, Stanford's getting my product for wonderful.
They needed
right?
the help, huh?
Yeah, they sure did. And
They're a
so,
nonprofit
they are. That's what the woman said.
with deep pockets. Yeah.
Mhm. Absolutely. And so that's something where, I know we're just meeting today, but, hopefully we could, stay in touch, and, hopefully, if you guys are open, to hearing more about my training, and we could talk about offering, a special packet at with a steep discount, with the, recognition that it'll go to people who actually need it, not the Stanfords or, the St. Jude's of the world. Who got one of my scholarships, by the way. So I'm like, oh dear.
I'm kind of laughing because we are living in an experience right now where a lot of federal funding is about to go to some providers that we might not have chosen in our own
Mhm.
communities.
Yeah.
Oh, believe me, I know that song really well.
One of the other things about rural is, when I'm thinking specific about the disabilities community, is we are south of Scott County and we are north of Mankato, and inside we are more rural. So we have people that go outward for networks as opposed to inward for networks, and yet we have a county government system that serves people with disabilities, but that networking is going outside as opposed to staying within. And that's something we're trying to think about in terms of our digital communications and networking and marketing the county and stuff like that. But that's certainly true for people with disabilities too, because you drive to where you can get your medical care done, and where the support groups are, and they're not necessarily within the county itself.
Yeah. I think, at least, I've been here in Minnesota since 2016, so I think I'm coming up on my 5-year anniversary. And something that I've just seen over and over is that we have all these vendors with government contracts with really poor tools and provide very poor service. And so I would like to see, people getting training in procurement, and in tool selection, and in tool negotiation, and in training.
Mhm.
And I think that would make a big difference, because part of the reason why there's all these, issues is that the tools we have are not the best. I mean, I'm a state employee through my teaching appointment, and
Mhm.
I can't even fill out my own time card.
Mm.
And so when I called the vendor and I said, why aren't you guys making these changes? And so, well, MMB just renewed a contract for 10 years. And I was like, how?
Yeah.
And then I checked, and, there's just so many issues with procurement.
Yeah.
And so,
Right.
and that's just not just an organization issue. It goes back to some of my smaller clients, my small business. I have this coffee shop who's my client. They're not one of my biggest clients, but all we had to do is get them off, Peachtree software, and get them into FreshBooks, and then go switch to WordPress, and they were fully accessible.
Mm.
It all came down to the tools. And so, I hate to, so a couple of years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, I get a call from this company here in Minnesota who said, hey, can you just test our website to make sure that, and tell us that it's accessible? And I said, I can't do that unless I test it. Well, how much would it cost? And I said, I'm not going to do that unless I test it. Bottom line, they ended up going with another excellent vendor who gave them their testing and got them the paperwork that needed to get reinstated with the state of Minnesota.
Hmm.
You know, and so there's just so much corruption in the vendor system. And I think if we were just to get better tools, I mean, that would be just huge. Which would then answer your issues about, you know, digital communication. I mean, there's some tools out there that are just doing wonderful things. We just can't, you know, as nonprofits or government agencies, we just can't access those great tools.
And you're right about the legacy issues. We talk about at the county level, taping the board meetings, but then they have to be, there's an ADA issue because you have to have the, you know, the words at the bottom, which is great to have, but what the county has now for software doesn't do that. They'd have to, so it's these legacy things that are tough to make improvements.
So one of my approaches that's been successful with legacy problems is, you know, you give people the training to, so I am anti-workarounds. And one of the reasons I'm anti-workarounds is because once people work around a tool and then they just keep doing that, and they don't realize that workarounds are temporary fixes, not long-term fixes.
Yeah.
And so, but one of my trainings is really teaching people how to do temporary workarounds until you could get a new tool. And understanding that would change once you get the new tool. You won't have to do all these things, right? But no, there's just so many crappy tools that we're using here, and at least I could speak to the Minnesota state system.
Well, and there's politics in that too, in that the almighty dollar, and a lot of times, it's just picking the right thing, and there isn't always there doesn't have to be a cost differential in most of these cases, but sometimes there is. And when that's there, you get and then there's this whole you're talking about the purchasing process, and the problem I see is too many people see purchasing as something that they have to get through or they have to work around. So how do I buy what I want to buy, and ignore purchasing? Whereas if you're actually doing purchasing correctly, purchasing is a weapon against the vendors, not
Absolutely.
And so
you're getting 2 thumbs up from me. That's you hit it right on the nail. And for me, this is why I feel that anti-ableist.
I'll call you back in 5 minutes. All right, thanks.
Are you guys calling me? Do I need to log off?
No. No. Barbara just had a phone call in the background and we were just hearing that. Yeah, sorry, go on.
Barbara forgot to mute herself, and then, and you were breaking up for a moment too.
Oh, okay. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Okay, so kind of lost my train of thought there. I think we were talking about anti-ableist, training.
Well, and purchasing as a weapon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it just in my experience working with MMB, and I've had my projects, my personal projects as a faculty member at a state school here that I've taken up to the governor's office, and I've actually had a chance to talk to the governor on some of these issues. And it goes back to people wanting to use something just because they don't have the time to go do the research to find something better. Or it's often choices are made for convenience, not because it's the best choice. And convenience is often someone doesn't have time to go find something else. And so, part of being a digital inclusion practitioner is that you're reevaluating your tools, every year, and you also have a backup tool. And so the byproduct of that is that you end up having a list of tools that you can share with people. I know it's not the ideal answer. It may not even work here with the state. I mean, there's just lots of politics, right? When it comes to procurements and, lots of, a lot of, I know there's vendors that have very deep relationships with people, with some employees of the state. And even though their system crashes every hour, it's not going anywhere. But, what I always talk to people, especially in government agencies, to say, hey, you can't control everything, but what you can control, do it at your best. And eventually, people are going to see how much that works better and adopt it. And I've had great success with government agencies in California, in Massachusetts, and Florida, where it was one department doing something and it was so successful that, eventually the organizations adopted their protocol. And
Success breeds success.
absolutely.
That's for sure. So, and yes, and so frequently we get into this, oh, well, we just want to renew the contract because it, that's the easy path, is renew the current contract. Whereas, actually we do need to go out and evaluate these things every so often, because people do make better mousetraps.
Absolutely.
For me, I think what's really important about this is the conversation that we're having, and how to integrate this conversation in every conversation that we have about people with disabilities. My perspective is that there are two worlds: people with disabilities and people who get the blessings and the diversity of people with disabilities, and others who are completely ignorant of it. And we need to keep bringing this up in every conversation, really, to get that inclusiveness that we're looking for.
Well, and I would put it a different way. It's the people it's the able people that recognize either they have disabled people in their lives, or that someday they will become disabled in some way or another.
Yeah.
Those that think it will never happen to them.
Yes, I like that too.
And I think sometimes those people who don't want to look beyond the solution they have, or those are those special users. All they know, and I think of back in the day, all they know is the DOS prompt. All they know is the DOS prompt, and they're afraid. And that gets into the digital inclusion part of it, is that training part of it again, is making people feel comfortable with a new solution that within days might be better, but you feel so locked into your own limited knowledge.
So I'm sorry, I have to run. I have to make this call back. Bello, I'm going to call you because we are a blended broadband community, and this would be a great project for us. I'm going to call you.
Awesome. I look forward to it.
All right. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, Barbara. We'll see you.
Well, was that Mary who gave the example just 2 seconds ago, or 3 seconds?
That's Ann.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ann. Sorry, Ann.
No.
I don't know your voices yet. So something that so again, one of the reasons why I feel that with the digital inclusion sphere, I'm having a lot more success is because it's evidence-based. And so, like you are right, it's the specialized users that are the decision makers. And specialized users, especially level 1, level 2, they don't want to change. And so one approach to helping them adopt new ideas is what's called the ESA tactic, which is engage, study, and activate. And what that looks like is engage them in engage them on the conversation, walk with them together, and do it once or twice together with them. And then they'll see that it's better. And that looks different depending on what you're working on. Like if it's a device you're developing, it's different than say a property, a digital property, or a service, right? But it's really, really taking them, holding their hand, engaging them, studying together, and then activating, letting them know that they could do it, and doing it with them once or twice to get that that repetition in their brain where they can feel comfortable.
I think that's the recipe for a lot of things. I think that engage, study, activate is a really good process.
You know, so with my digital, digital inclusion training, most of my students are saying that they're actually applying that to other parts of their world. Like if they're HR professionals, are using applying that to HR, they're applying that to accounting, and so my goal with digital inclusion is to operationalize inclusion, right? And so I'm stepping away from the ADA accessibility work. That approach is like, here's a checklist, check the box and you're good. With this other model, it's always growing, and you're knowing yourself that it's always going to be changing, and you have the tools to manage the change through, like, the engage, study, activate, exercise, and through other tools that I teach folks. But yeah, no, I mean, I feel, for a long time when I was a writer, I said to myself, oh, I'm going to change the world, or I'm going to make an impact or a contribution by telling people's story and telling my story. And I didn't get anywhere with that, because that's just, anecdotes, it's story-based, right? But once I learned how to do evidence-based training, I got results,
Nice.
and so all those accolades that I've gotten, best disability advocate by Huffington Post and Business Insider and SF Weekly, came from the fact that I first practiced something and then, got the evidence, and then was able to then help other people replicate, my experience and my results.
It's impressive. I mean, I could see where people would take that to different fields of study, to different aspects of their life. I think back to, when I was in high school, you only used the computer during the computer class. It wasn't integrated, but if you, get people to think about, people with disabilities and different needs, not as you said, something you check off, but as part of something you use every day. You can't imagine a class now without a computer.
Yeah, no, I grew up, when I was in high school, we had keyboarding and we actually had typewriters. And so I remember that if we did well, I think we were typing the brown fox jumped over the lazy dog, or something like that. And once we got that really good at that, then we could start using a computer. But there was that process of, like, you start with the typewriter and then get upgraded to God, I think we're using those Apple computers with, like, the green font and, like, the 5.5 floppy disks. But now it's all there.
You're closer to my age than I thought.
I remember those too.
That's amazing. Funny. Well, I'm looking, we're just in the last few minutes of the hour, so I want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to just say anything they want to say.
I'll just say thank you for you guys bringing Bello in, and then thank you, Bello, for talking with us.
Absolutely. And please consider me a resource. And please feel free to share my email with everyone who is on the call, and my phone, my cell number, and our office number. And, I am very, you guys are my people. You guys are trying to, make things more inclusive. So yeah, please consider me a resource.
Yeah. Yes, thank you very much. What we will do is we will post this on the Blandon on Broadband blog too, so more people will see this after the fact. So
Yeah, we've been recording it.
Okay, so yeah, please don't put my phone number on the blog.
No, I will not do that. I was just thinking a link to your business. That's all I was going to do there. Then it's on you.
I figured as much, but it's like just making sure.
Yeah, no. I do a lot of work with the Women's March. We don't share a lot of phone numbers.
Oh, I love the Women's March.
Yeah.
I did a story about them through a paper a couple of years ago. They're really working hard towards inclusion. I've done work with them with the chapter in San Francisco.
Awesome. I'm going to remember you for the chapter in Minnesota. Although I won't say anymore, but we're kind of in flux. We had a lot of juggling we're trying to learn how to do right now, but I'm going to remember you for that world too, because that would be awesome. So,
well, thank you all for your time, and this was fun.
Thank you. So nice to meet you. Thanks
so much,
David. Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Thanks.